Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Turning Techies into Leaders. I'm joined today by with Lucas Smith, who's a senior manager of product analytics at Huddle, and is someone that I met recently because I invited him on LinkedIn. He reached out to me, and we started talking, and it lasted almost 90 minutes. So I think there's going to be some really good insights from our chat. How are you today, Lucas?
Good. Good. Excited to be here to talk.
Yeah, I think where I want to start off today is I want to talk a little bit about, you've had a really unique career path. Would you mind kind of sharing how you've got to where you are today with us?
I actually got my introduction into data working in a research lab during my first, not one, but two first master's degree. The lab we were working in was human performance and it was related to industry. So when you really think about human performance technology in
Yeah.
sport, there are labs, they have cameras that look at biomarkers and try to understand how physics are working within sport and within the human body, or how the human body itself is performing. I think it's become a lot more popular with the Peter Attias of the world recently,
Hmm.
putting out really some popular mainstream podcasts on some of the topics. But when I got my start, it was all of this random major amounts of data coming in just about experiments we were doing and trying to just really understand how people, how their bodies were impacted by work. I remember I was asked, "Hey, Lucas, we need someone who's got some math background to come work in the lab and do stats for us. Would you like to do it? We'll give you an assistantship." And I looked at them and I said, "Stats, that was the class I hated the most out of my entire undergrad experience." I was like, "Why would
Yeah,
I?
who
Sure, but
didn't,
I need to be
right?
better at it."
Yeah.
So I took the leap of faith and went in, and so I got my master's degrees in kinesiology and human performance, and got a minor in statistics along the way. So from there, it's just been, I would say, a career of happenstance more than anything. I was doing some fatigue analytics research with some major railroads in the US, which then led to more of a traditional BI role in a safety department as kind of an analyst working with, God forbid, Oracle BI, and really just kind of learned the ropes of enterprise data warehousing and data. And then from there, we really wanted to take a risk analytics approach to how the railroad functions. So we were looking at things like, can we find out where within our network of 30,000 miles rail was breaking? And if so, how targeted can we be for our crews so that we don't have trains running over broken rail and eventually derailing? And so we saw a lot of really cool results from predictive analytics, is what we called it back in the day. So that was kind of my introduction to data science. Again, happenstance, keeping just kind of an open mind. Went and got a master's degree in predictive analytics at the time. Now it's just the Master's of Science in Data Science at Northwestern University, which led to more leadership roles at the railroad I was at, and kind of your enterprise BI, counting how trains move type of role. And then from there, shifted over into tech, where I am now with Huddle. For those who don't know, Huddle's a global sports technology firm. We believe in giving athletes every shot that they deserve. And so we have technology that ranges from cameras that record film for high schools
Hmm.
and professional sporting teams, as well as film breakdown tools for amateur sports, and all the way up to the highest professional levels. So my role now has shifted a little bit from a centralized model of kind of owning a lot of the data analytics at Huddle to now being really very laser focused on the product analytics, product tracking side of the company.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great career, and especially when you were, I first talked the first time, we were going through some things that you had done when you were at the railroads, and just some of the interesting part there that caught my attention was this ability to communicate data to people who are not data native.
Yep.
How did you convince a railroader who probably is definitely not data literate to be like, hey, if you change the way you exert your force, if you change your impact location, if you pick up the hammer differently, you're going to get a different outcome. Um, so how did you kind of manage that? Because that's a big ask.
Yeah, so first of all, I had some great leadership alongside me who had credibility in the field. I think there's always as an analyst, as a data person, there's always a credibility piece of it. So the more business experience you can get in the trenches, I think helps. So one of the things I learned from one of my leaders early on was really getting involved within the operation. So we would go and we would work with the crews who maintained the track.
Yeah.
And so we would just sit out there observing what they did. when there were breaks in the action, we were able to ask questions. Most people don't realize, but railroads in the US are governed by a pretty darn large rule book. And so I really learned the rules inside and out. I took the same tests the operating managers took to make sure that I understood the
Oh,
rules.
nice.
But also, when it comes to analytics and data, you're able to then look at the rule and kind of question it and say, does the data prove out what this rule
Hmm.
says? And so there were times where we had some data around, let's say, the side of the rail you were swinging the sledgehammer that showed, yeah, this is like potential for putting someone at risk. And we were able to change the rules internally to swing the hammer differently. Or the other thing in the US is by law, railroads have to report injuries, derailments, rail
Hmm.
equipment events to the federal government. And so we're sitting on this massive database of even the smallest little type of safety issues. So it's like if a car in the yard slightly derails. Maybe they have to literally pick it up, put it back on the rails, and it costs the company $100 to fix, let's say. We
Hmm.
still have to keep an internal record of it per regulation. And so we're just sitting on this treasure trove of data and really empowering our local management teams to manage and have access to that kind of, in the product analyst world, we would call event level data, where they could go in and they could see, hey, my rate is this, but when I click into it, I know it was this event, this event, this event. And then within that, you've got all sorts of dimensions that you can think of, like what weather was happening at the time, or how long was the crew on shift, and things like that. So it really gave local management the ability to go in and dig deeper. The key in all of that was not the data. It was
Hmm.
how management saw and was able to leverage the data. I remember we were rolling out a predictive model, which was really, really tough because in industry in general, we can motivate people to do better. Not
Right.
let's use science to pull the human out of the loop where it's not necessary, or use data to find interventions and where they may take place. And so we had this predictive model we were looking to roll out, and they had a certain way of categorizing the risk that we were trying to measure with this predictive model. And it was very individualized. Like I create my list and then I go address my list. And we took a trip where we were in 3 different cities a day. We would hop off the plane, run to the regional or the local, meet with their local leadership, show them their list, show them our list, do
Hmm.
kind of like a blind test experiment where you had them say, like, which list is better. And so then we aggregated the data of these choices that local leadership was making. And I think it was something like 15 out of 18 areas chose the predictive model list. And so
Hmm.
we summarized the results. We went back on a roadshow and did presentations at the leadership level in those areas. And that was really what started to drive adoption of kind of this new paradigm. And again, it didn't start with the data. It started with the problem of how do we reduce kind of the overall risk within kind of the railroad. So
It seems to me, I mean, you created a problem that was unified across both parties, right? Seems to me the approach that you took, which maybe had a huge success.
yeah, and then from there it was getting the confidence in that approach from a single model and then rolling it out through many, many, many elements of the
Hmm.
railroad. So getting the next model and getting the next model, and then not just like getting the models out in the open, but showing the results that came from getting those models out in the open. So every month we did reporting
Right.
where we looked at closed month results, similar to how you would in a finance team. And as part of that, we also evaluated how well did our model perform in the prior month, given what we know now, and then what happened to rates because of that. And so that was really, I think, an impactful element of how we stayed on top of it. It wasn't just a rollout; it was a consistent approach to improving
Review.
holistically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I would assume that you change your messaging based on the audience that you're talking to as well. I mean, if you go in there and say variable ABC has X impact X and Y, I'm sure if you were talking to the regional managers in that area, you're getting, glances of death, basically. So how did you tailor your message based on that? Because I mean, there's different audiences, different ways of speaking to them.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was relatively new to data science in that role, and I was like in the middle of my classes and just learning about it and just geeked out on everything from machine learning to time series forecasting. Had all the lingo like front of my brain and everything. And I vividly remember we were using odds ratios to kind of talk about feature performance or feature prediction.
Hmm.
And we really wanted to show some of that context to local leadership. I just remember sitting in a meeting and my senior or my general director, I said, "Yep, these are the odds ratios." He goes, "Those aren't odds ratios, Lucas." I was like, "No, they're odds ratios." He goes, "No, they're risk multipliers." I was like, "What
Hmm.
do you mean by risk multiplier?" He goes, "Here's what I want to say. If I have 5 of these events happen, all I do is multiply that number together to get my total risk."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yes, you can, but they're odds ratios." And he's like, "No, they're risk multipliers, and you owe me a box of donuts every time you say odds ratio." And so it was
Yeah.
just this like stark moment where it's like even technically accurate terms can confuse and throw the message off. And so it's like, how do you message those terms? And sometimes you got to get creative and do things that are internal.
Yeah, like half, I mean, you got to market those things to your point, right? Like risk multiplier is much clearer to me as a human to say, okay, if I do more of these, that multiplies my risk versus odds ratios. And you're right, the calculation is identical. The same thing it's the same thing. It's just to me, it's like, oh, I don't like risk. Risk is bad. I like
Yeah.
odds. I'll play the odds. I want to kind of change a little. So, in your current role at Huddle as a senior manager, you're doing both a combination of hands-on work, but
hmm
also you're ultimately accountable for the analytics within the product department. How do you juggle those two things? How do you find the time to build your own work and manage the team that you have, and also communicate that strategically?
Yeah. So that has been quite the journey and quite the challenge. And I think it's one that every person who's new to management in the data space deals with. You
Yeah.
have stuff flying everywhere. A lot of times there are unsaid expectations across the organization that you don't even know exist of data and what you're supposed to be doing. Um, and in the places in my career with kind of this hybrid role, I have failed the most when I have failed to communicate and not been clear. And communication takes a different role depending on the organization. So
Hmm.
I'm at a place where I was at prior to Huddle. It was really well thought out email communication. There were times where you spend 3 hours on an email draft before you send it. So it was very clear, and everyone who needed to know it was on it.
Hmm.
And you knew it was going to get read. In kind of the more Slack-based tech world, it's less about long narrative form emails with a summary at the top and more about like just quick hit communication punchlines and repeating it often. And
Yeah.
I think, a lot of people say leadership is just repeating yourself over and over and over again. And I think letting people know what you're doing, especially in a tech organization, is repeating yourself in short bursts over and over and over again. So I think communication on what your team's working on, and less about like we're doing X, Y, and Z, and more about like we're shooting for our product team is making better product decisions. We know that the company makes more money and saves more money if we make better product decisions. So we're angling in at that. And what does that mean? That means we're consolidating tracking platforms. We can't have this world where everyone is pulling from a different source of data to understand product usage. We got to have common conventions. That
Hmm.
saves us time, that saves us money. And then from there, you roll that into some kind of metric that you can anchor on internally. So for us right now, it's, in our product work, who is using the stuff we're building?
Yeah.
And then if we build something and ship it and no one's using it, we then start to ask why. Why aren't people using it? Is the group that we focused on narrow and their peak season not here yet? And so maybe they have less incentive to get in there today than they would in another role. Maybe it's
Hmm.
we missed the mark. And we really have to ask ourselves that question and constantly being in conversations with leaders and other people who you're producing the work for. I like to call them business partners, not stakeholders, because I believe analytics is a business
Business
partner,
partner, yeah.
not as much an
Agree.
order
I
taker.
agree.
And so uh, talking to your business partners, and when you're with your business partner saying, hey, we've been watching usage in of our Tableau stuff, or we've been watching usage of our Redash stuff, and it looks like you haven't been in here in a while. Can you tell me why?
Hmm.
And the goal is not just to produce something and move on. It's kind of this co-creation of like we're trying to anchor on better decisions. And one way, not every way, but one way we can do that is have easier to use data and have metrics and measures we can learn from.
Yeah.
And so really communicating that impact very consistently, I think is the key. There have been times that even here at Huddle where I failed to do that, and I've seen really good work either go unused or
Yeah.
unnoticed because I didn't. And so I think it's as a leader, it's really key to find those moments where you can do that. Other thing that I've really learned in my current role is when you have so many people across so many geographies, across so many types of teams and products, you have to also have a system. And this sounds so cliche, like I'm trying to hit the TikTok lottery or something. But for me, a system is just like, what is my step of repeatable processes
Yeah.
that I can check in on constantly and hold myself accountable? So, one technique, I personally drift towards someone needs a query. Oh, I know how to do that. I'm just going to go like do that quickly, push it off so that my team doesn't get bothered by it.
Sure.
Or I'm going to tell somebody no, but I'm going to get back to it later. And it just like hangs out in my head
Right.
to come back to. Recently, what I've been doing is I've got a personal document that I set up every day that I call the what am I doing to move this thing forward? That's literally the name of it. And this thing right now is really that platform consolidation and having that high quality usage data and high quality metrics around our usage so that we can make better informed decisions.
Hmm.
And so I have elements of that, and I'm just asking myself, what am I one of them is communication.
Yep.
One of them is, when you're working with product teams and you need higher quality or different tracking,
Hmm.
you're not doing it yourself. You're asking them to do it. So it's like, how am I working with those product managers and those engineering managers to ensure that that's staying on track?
Yeah.
Another of it is with my team, it's like, do we have a design review set yet for next week? Do they know what's next up? Do they know how that next up then anchors in? And so when I've got this, like, how am I moving the needle or how am I moving this thing forward document, it just gives me this daily checkpoint where I'm saying, like, am I moving the strategic things forward across those elements? That
Yeah.
then frees me up to do individual contributor technical work where the time permits. It's move the big rocks first
Yeah.
and then let the technical work fit in. And I think a lot of leaders, especially early on in their technical management career, especially in data, tend to anchor
Oh,
on the
flip it.
Python notebook they're working
Yeah.
on, or writing the DBT code, or building the
Yeah.
dashboard
Well, it's
versus
what you're
the,
comfortable with, right? It's what
yep,
you're used to.
it's
It's what you
very,
came
yep,
from.
exactly.
It's interesting. I mean, you've kind of brought up like three themes all the way through, which is, one is communicate the way that they expect to be communicated with, communicate over the different mediums you have. You just talked a little bit about the concept of like storytelling or even just creating a narrative that really kind of resonates with the people, asking questions of them in terms of does this resonate with you as well? And now you're talking about processes. There's one other question actually. I kind of just want to. I was looking over your resume. You've been at two places for a really long time. In our industry now, that's not necessarily the case, but you've worked your way up. And I think a lot of people now see in the market, especially in tech, it's like, I have to leave this organization to get promoted. I have to move, I have to jump between companies. You see resumes now with 1 year, 2 years of experience. You've got almost seven and then now five, and you've worked your way up consistently at both. What has been your secret there, and why have you done that?
First of all, I'm very risk averse, so change scares me. Uh, so it's an easy thing for my personality to not move. Jokes aside, the I what I credit is not anything technical. Not
Hmm.
any, obviously, your teams have to achieve in management roles, and as an IC, you have to do what you said you're doing, and you have to do it at a high level, and you have to do it across broader areas. Like that's common, right? A
Hmm.
lot of times that's happenstance. The company has to be at the stage and the time to give that to you. Um, a lot of times it can be luck, like who's managing, when is it
Hmm.
managing? Are you in a cost conservation mode or a growth mode as a company? Like there's a
Hmm.
lot of things you can't control, but the things you can control throughout the thing throughout your career are things like 6 months is a short time horizon. And I think a lot of people after 6 months feel comfortable in a role,
Hmm.
and they confuse comfortable with excelling and proficient.
Right.
So when you're first comfortable in your role, you know what's going on. Now you need to raise the bar for the next person who's going to take your role. Versus like, I'm comfortable, I need a new challenge, I'm bored, I'm going to go find another role. Well, few companies are going to move you within six
Hmm.
months of hitting the role. They haven't got the ROI out of you as an individual. Also, in many cases, there's still a lot more you need to accomplish after the first 6 months.
Hmm.
And so I think like recognizing that boredom is a thing when you get comfortable and knowing that boredom is just that first step. Um, I think the second piece of it is I'm just fascinated with probably everything in this world and how it works. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I will find people within organizations who are really passionate about the thing they're doing. You don't find that everywhere. And so at the railroad, there was a director of derailment prevention who I don't know why we hit it off, but we just got to know each other really well. And I just went to his desk every day and told him to review derailments with me and tell me what he was thinking and how they should be investigating it and really learning the business side.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, some of my favorite times with the railroad were actually sitting in the cars in the yard with local management
Mm.
and just watching how the whole operation ran.
Yeah.
On the kind of tech side, it might be sitting with support. I remember I onboarded a new hire here at Huddle, and on the onboarding plan, I had to spend 2 days with support. And I got
Yeah.
some flack from my management chain for it. And that person told me it was one of the more impactful things they've done
Yeah.
because it just helped them learn the problems our customers were struggling with. It might be sitting with a PM. It might finding internal recorded customer calls for product interviews
Hmm.
and things like that. Like and especially in the tech space, there's so many resources for data people to be in and learn and question the business.
Hmm.
Um, Lenny's podcast this last week released one with the VP of data at DoorDash, and she basically mentioned alignment of goals between the data people and the squads. And so the data people had the same goals to move retention numbers
Hmm.
or to move revenue numbers or to move usage numbers or whatever it might be as the engineering squad, as the product managers. And so you didn't have this disconnect between like number of users in Tableau and how that actually
Right.
matters to the business. It's you succeed or fail with the business. And so not every mo I would assume most tech companies aren't that way. As someone trying to say like I feel stuck, what can I do? The things you can control, go learn and get on that front line of the business. And sometimes it means like I'm working a little later to do an analysis for this team that I'm learning from, but I can also contribute in a certain way. And it's
Yeah.
not my job, but
No.
I can go learn the business and I can really level up there. And those are the types of things you can control. It's rarely ever is I need to go learn a new machine learning technique.
Yeah.
Rarely ever is I need to go build another dashboard that's cooler.
Hmm.
Um, and so like I would say
Yeah.
that's been the success in my career is just being constantly curious about the businesses I work in and then
Hmm.
just pursuing the curiosity within there.
I mean, that's fantastic, and I second everything you just said there because I think that's the differentiator. Like better code, no, the business doesn't see that. Better model,
Yep.
the business, yeah, you might be able to shift the needle a little bit that way, but in reality, you're going to learn so much more by just sitting in the train with the regional manager in that space, right? You're going to understand how they think, understand how they work. So when you develop your next product, you're actually able to cater it to the way that they would look at it versus
Yep.
not having that context. And I think I've seen that many times where people get stuck in their careers is exactly that. Like, I cannot get promoted. Okay, well, do you understand how that works in customer service? Do you understand what our sales pipeline looks like? Do you understand, how we generate revenue as an organization? And are your solutions catering to that? I think that's the part that's the differentiator, right? That's where management looks at you and goes, "Oh wow, Lucas is really thinking about this company really well, not just he builds great code."
Yep. Well, and it's
That's
where you build advocates too. And I
yeah.
think the hardest thing to do is find an advocate that moves you along, and that's the most impactful for anybody's career. When people think they have to jump from company to company to company to climb the ladder, it means they haven't found that advocate for their
Hmm.
career at that place. Um, Sometimes it means like they've just reached a spot at the company
Yeah.
where there isn't, and you got to be realistic with yourself, right? But I think a lot of times you jump before you've hit that cap on
Hmm.
your level or your job title or your responsibilities or whatever it might be. And
Absolutely.
so like by really digging into the business, a lot of times you get those advocates in places that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Just like we did last time we chatted, we've gone way over our time. I'll wrap it up here, and just by, thanking you for all the insights. I think, you're hitting on some key themes that I hear left and right, which is communication, asking why, making sure that you're understanding the business and getting those contacts in. I think that's where you've had a lot of success in your career, and you've shared a lot of that today with us here. So I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much,
Absolutely.
and yeah, best of luck with the rest of your career.